Enniscorthy Library for Heritage Week. Before we start, can I ask you to check your mobile phones? And please put them on silent. There may be some recording going on the course of the evening, so it would be a shame if we had some bells of various descriptions ringing. And can you also note the exits from this building? We are on the first floor. So the emergency exit is through the kitchen and down the fire escape here. And also we should be able to go down the main stairs that you came in through and out the front door. But I don't expect there will be any occasion for us to have to evacuate quickly this evening. Just to say that we're honoured to host this lecture here in Enniscorthy Library this evening. It's the first in a series of events from which I'm sure you will hear more and more in the coming months and into next year. There'll be the surveying of the 1798 battlefield on Vinegar Hill. I'm told it's the subject of the most extensive battlefield archaeological investigation that has yet taken place in Ireland. So we're truly honoured to be among the first people to hear about what's been happening today. I'm now going to hand over to Jackie Sidney, who will MC the evening and who will introduce the things. Okay?
I'm going to be very brief, but good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and Councillor Keith Doyle from Enniscorthy Municipal District Council. Again, thank you for joining us here this evening on what is now a very exciting, and I had to cross out day because it's now a very exciting week for Vinegar Hill Battlefield, the town of Enniscorthy and the county of Wexford. You're okay. As Billy Idol would say with a rebel yell, we're delighted to have a fellow rebel. Well, via Limerick, but Damian Shiels of Rubicon Heritage Services, although we're now the real rebels here tonight.
That's true.
To talk about the very exciting archaeological discoveries recently found on Vinegar Hill Battlefield. And did I mention to you how excited we are? Because we're really super excited. And that's an adjective you're going to hear plenty of this evening. Firstly, I wish to just explain a little bit further as to why we're all here during Heritage Week. And we, which includes Tony Larkin from Wexford County Council, Dr. Ronan O'Flaherty of Cranebag Consulting, Rory O'Connor from the National 1798 Centre, and myself are part of the research team charged with undertaking a 3-year programme of archaeological, geographical and historical research into the events and the expanse of the battles of Enniscorthy and Vinegar Hill, and they're from the 28th of May to the 21st of June 1798. And specifically our task was to create a complete picture of the events by researching the extent of the battlefield, the rebel camp, the associated material culture, the sequence of the battle and any areas of intense fighting, Crown Forces movements on the eve and the day of the Battle of Vinegar Hill, including the artillery placements, the existing structures and features of Vinegar Hill, and we look out the window today with the most fabulous view of the windmill in Vinegar Hill, the levels and the engagement of the fighting in the town, and some desk-based research into the historical, folklore and military research to compile a full documentary archive. That's what the challenge we gave ourselves, and I think we're doing very well on it. The project also had a number of strategic benefits, including to place Vinegar Hill Battlefield at the forefront of battlefield research and interpretation in Ireland, to set a standard of work that would become a national benchmark, to further opportunities to link with similar battlefields overseas, to create a national and international network of sites that would help to promote increased visitors to the town and to the county, and thereby increasing the economic benefits through tourism development, and then to inform Wexford County Council policy for the interpretation and conservation of Vinegar Hill Battlefield and its environs. I should also say that during this project we've been working collaboratively with a number of agencies and organisations who are members of our steering committee or assisting us in other ways. These include, first and foremost, Wexford County Council and Enniscorthy Municipal District Council, the Departments of Culture, Heritage and the Gaeltacht and Defence, the Office of Public Works, the Heritage Council, the Discovery Programme, the National Museum of Ireland, the Defence and the Reserve Defence Forces, the National Roads Authority, and the Centre for Battlefield Archaeology in the University of Glasgow. So as you can see, lots of people are very, very interested in Vinegar Hill Battlefield, and they've given us their support. Our thanks as well to Hazel and the team in the library, and also to the Library Service of Wexford County Council, who will be assisting us in our publication. For our archaeological research this week, we're delighted to welcome an international team of experts in the study of battlefields to Wexford. Now again, the undisputed rebel county. You can forget about Cork, it's so
that's all to do with the War of the Roses anyway.
It's so last week. We're delighted to work with Damian, Shiels here, and Enda from Rubicon Heritage Services, Dr. James Bosnell from specialist sensing firm Earthsound in Sligo IT, also his colleagues Darren, Kieran and Michael, to Sam Wilson from the University of Huddersfield, and Hilda van der Hulde from the University College Dublin, London. I was so chuffed at getting your names. The Institute of Archaeology, who are both members of Cotswold Archaeology. We've been working quietly in the background for the last 3-ish years, and as this phase of the project nears its end, we have now completed or are finalising research on the following aspects: a review and analysis of the existing primary and secondary historical, military and oral history accounts, an examination of LiDAR and aerial photographs, photogrammetry of the windmill, an underwater survey, extensive field walking and geophysical analysis, architectural survey of Enniscorthy's town and Beals Barn, community and school participation and school information sessions, and finally, and what we're here to hear tonight about, licence detection work by Rubicon Heritage, Earthsound and Cotswold. There's a very simple reason why we've been working quietly in the background, and that is to protect Vinegar Hill Battlefield. Look out, she is a site of national and international significance. She's the largest battlefield so close to an urban area in Ireland. She saw the first use of the drastic and devastating explosive shell, the initial use of the rifle in any field of combat, and the first use of military drivers for the Royal Irish Artillery. She's the last major field engagement of the Crown Forces in Ireland. She's the last stand of the United Irishmen in Wexford. She's a testament to the birth of democracy in Ireland. She is now the most important battlefield ever investigated in Ireland in terms of its finds. Think about that one for a little bit. It's huge, huge. Our job, and your job, was and is to protect her from those who have only their personal interests at heart. So part of our job is to stress that to you. We knew that when we would go about making ongoing announcements of this work, that people would make their way there, as they have done previously, and remove artefacts in an unlicensed manner, and thereby depriving Enniscorthy, Wexford and Ireland of the rich knowledge we are now beginning to reveal, and you can see it here on the table in front of you. We worked with others to protect that site to the very best of our ability, for our mutual benefit, the town's benefit, and the benefit and the awareness of future generations. And we thank you for allowing us that opportunity. Just before I hand you over to Damian, can I just say that for people who are photographing the artefacts here tonight, and we have no bother with that at all, just if you're putting them out on Facebook or Twitter or whatever, will you just mention that they are taken from licensed detection? That's the bit we need to stress to everybody. Damian and his team are guided and directed by 2 licenses that allow them to detect, and it's time sensitive, and it's restricted to the week, and they know what they're doing. So please, can I stress to you, if you're putting it out on Facebook, remind people licensed detection, and if you spot anybody up there with wavy things, do please report. I'll mention it to you again, but just in case you're tweeting or Facebooking while I'm talking and I forget to say it to you. So I now have the great pleasure of introducing Damian Shiels to enlighten and illuminate us on their exciting and significant licence detection.
Yeah, before we start, and it's not all going to be, the Vinegar Hill bit is going to be in the second half of the talk, because we're archaeologists, and archaeologists, as Jackie was saying, it's a licensed survey. Archaeology is all about context, and I don't want to start talking to you about us finding different objects up on the hill without giving you some understanding of what battlefield and conflict archaeology is, what it can tell us, and the importance of being able to know exactly where you found it and doing it in a very structured and surveyed way. I would like, though, before we start, we've had a lot of acknowledgements, but I've been doing battlefield and conflict archaeology in Ireland for, unfortunately, almost 2 decades, though I look much younger. But this is the first time that anybody has shown the passion or the vision, the guys in the 1798 Centre and Wexford County Council, to engage in a survey of this scale. We have a lot of really promising sites in Ireland. A lot of it is based on the fact that our legislation is so strong, where in other countries, a lot of these sites can be picked clean by illegal metal detection or legal metal detection as it may be. We have a really, really strong battlefield preservation here, we think. But unfortunately, we have an issue in Ireland where people just don't seem to investigate, explore it archaeologically. But the vision that's been shown in doing this and the passion for it has, particularly this week, led to incredibly significant results. And there's no competition now in that this is the most significant battlefield archaeological survey that's been undertaken on the island. And most of it as a result of findings this week. Some of the material on this table came out of the ground about 2 or 3 hours ago. So you're literally the first people to see it, right? And you'll see Rubicon a bit down the bottom because I work for Rubicon and it's a Rubicon slide. But again, just to acknowledge that this is very much a multifaceted team with archaeologists from Cotswold, IT, Sligo, Earthsound all working together. And all here, so which is always the best way. But just to give you an overview of what we're going to discuss, I want to give you a bit about the origins of conflict and battlefield archaeology. What is it, and where did it start, and what type of things has it found? Okay, just by looking at a few of the kind of more stellar examples from around the world. Then I'm going to just talk specifically about Ireland and talk about a couple of examples that I've worked on, kind of have a relation to what we're talking about with Vinegar Hill. So a site in Kinsale, the 1601 siege that we'll touch on briefly, and another mass grave that I excavated in Dublin. Because a part of I was one of the excavators in Dublin. Apart from just the general fighting up there, we know that there are people buried up there. This is effectively a graveyard, so you know, it's always worth remembering that when we're dealing with battlefields. Then we're going to have a quick look at what we look at as archaeologists when we're looking at a battlefield. What do we consider to be part of a battlefield, and how do we go about trying to assess what things are in a battlefield and how things might have changed. Then the research project itself. I'm not going to dwell too long on the actual history of the fighting, though I will give an account that we did for the Irish Battlefields project so that you have an understanding of it. And then we'll go into the results that we got. This is our second week of survey results. We were here in May as well, and the differences, and particularly what's gone on this week, which is pretty exciting stuff, right? But battlefield archaeology, and this is always a bit of a reductionism, but battlefield archaeology has a lot to do with somebody smoking a cigarette, right? In its current form. About 40 years ago, this is the Little Bighorn in Montana. If you've ever heard of Custer's Last Stand, this is where this happened. Fight in 1876. Second in command was a guy from County Carlow, Miles Walter Pugh. But this battlefield is covered in really tough prairie scotch grass. And about 40 years ago, a fire started on it. They think possibly from a cigarette, but for some reason. And it burnt off the grass. And allowed an archaeologist called Dr. Doug Scott to come in with a team of metal detectors and carry out a systematic survey of this battlefield. And what it revealed, for any of you who don't know the story, Custer's 7th Cavalry were wiped out by the Native Americans there. His work has revolutionised really how we look at these sites, because they were able, through identifying the bullet patterns, to follow where these men in the 7th Cavalry went across this landscape before they were killed. They were able to analyse the signatures on the individual bullets so they can track individual troopers of the 7th Cavalry across the field to discover where they were. And it really set off a light bulb of the potential for analysing this type of material, which wasn't often seen as archaeology because, you know, it's not Newgrange, it's not got a ring fort in it, it's not a big castle, because usually these battlefields just look like normal fields. So it really set off a revolution that was taken up from the United States, particularly in Britain, but it's beginning to spread all over Europe and the world. So to give you some examples of that, one of the big exponents of it is Professor Tony Pollard in the Centre for Battlefield Archaeology in Glasgow. And many of you have heard of the Battle of Culloden, 1746, Dromossie Moor, where the Jacobites were defeated by the Hanoverians. And he did archaeological work there, which is highly significant. They've set up their entire interpretation of the battlefield around the archaeological results, where they found the direct evidence for the Highlanders smashing into the Hanoverian line, where their claymores were cutting pieces off of Hanoverian soldiers holding up their muskets. All this type of evidence was there under the sod for them to reveal it. Probably the most famous mass grave to be found in Britain or Ireland is the Battle of Towton from the War of the Roses. When they were extending a town hall, they discovered this in the north of England, this incredible mass pit of men who were killed in that battle. And you can see from this particular skull the impacts. So we're going to have a quick look at Carrick Mines in a couple of minutes, and I'll talk to you about what you can tell often from finding those type of human remains. Bosworth, a good friend of Sam and I, Dr. Glenn Ford, has done an awful lot of work at Bosworth. For anybody who isn't sure about Bosworth, it's where the Tudors came to the throne. It's where Richard of York gave battle in vain. And this is the boar, one of the boar symbols of Richard's, is it personal guard, was it, Sam?
Yeah, it's his sort of personal heraldic symbol, really.
That was found on the battlefield and gives an indication of where those final moments may have been on that battlefield. So, you know, England is all about its Tudor history, so this is a highly significant battlefield and incredibly significant results. Also, the earliest use of artillery, which wasn't recorded historically, was found on this site. And one of the things that battlefield archaeology can show us is that even in recent history, where we think, sure, this has only happened in the last century or last 2 centuries, it's all been written and recorded. Why do we need to go out and do archaeological work on this? What's it going to tell us that's new? A good example of what it can tell us is the site of Isanti One in 1876. Again, to make a film reference, if any of you have seen Zulu Dawn, this is where the British are wiped out by the Zulus, Zulu impis coming in and attacking them and wiping them out. There's a very famous scene in the film where the ammunition isn't being given off the cart to the soldiers on the front line. And this is given as the excuse for the Zulus overrunning the British position, and that's why they're able to take the position. But through a combination, again Professor Tony Pollard did work, a combination of experimental archaeology and physical archaeology. So all the British troops were equipped with a gun called a Martini Henry rifle, and they discovered that when you fire this weapon in really hot temperatures, it has a tendency to jam. And then they went and they did battlefield archaeology on the site, and they discovered that each man in the outer line was standing further apart than had initially been thought, so that they were standing a few yards from each other. So when you combine the two pieces of information, where you have a widespread line with guys whose guns start to jam, what you have is huge gaps in the line that Zulus can go in and exploit, and it's one of the reasons that battle was lost. Large-scale survey, the Battle of Lutzen, 1632, 30 Years' War in Germany, has been looked at by Dr. Andres Schuber, who's probably done what's, I'd say, the most extensive metal detection survey across a battlefield that's ever taken place. It's a battle where the Swedish King Gustavus Adolphus was killed. But Andre's work was able to identify through all the munition scatters and everything, all the different locations where different elements of this battle took place. You could relate it to different troop types. And it allowed him to identify the location of the mass grave. They did so much work on the battlefield and understood it so well after years that they were able to say, oh, this is going to be where the battlefield was. Dr. Glenn Ford was really a pioneer in England for doing work, particularly on English Civil War battlefields, and this is his detection plot. It's difficult to see. You can see across a vast area at the Battle of Edge Hill, which is one of the early battles of the English Civil War in 1642, a war, of course, that had a major impact on Ireland as the War of the Three Kingdoms. One of my favourites is that one on the bottom left. For any of you who are into Roman history, the phrase, "Varus, give me back my legions." The Romans were supposedly never advanced across the Rhine because of a defeat they suffered in 9 AD when they moved over the river and were led into an ambush of German tribes who annihilated them. And incredibly, this battlefield has been fully discovered. It started off through analysis of Roman coins that were coming up in agricultural land, and they noticed that all the dates on the coins suggested that they were all minted prior to this AD 9 date. It's a very famous date in Roman historical sources. And then they started doing more and more investigations, and what they eventually found were the full German trenches that they had dug there in an effort to block in the Romans. They found huge numbers of pieces of military paraphernalia. They even found the remains of a pony or a donkey that had a bell with hay stuffed in the bell to stop it clanging as the Romans were moving through this forest. This is 2,000 years old, and the stuff is in agricultural fields, the same as out here in Vinegar Hill. And this is probably their star find. It's a silver Roman cavalry mask, a Roman cavalry mask that they found on the battlefield. So you can see you can go back 2,000 years and reveal amazing stuff. You can go back 50 years or 100 years and you can reveal amazing stuff. In an Irish context then, we've done little bits and pieces, significant work. Not much of it has had serious funding like this project is lucky enough to have. But there has been significant work. Jim O'Neill and Paul Loeb in Northern Ireland discovered the site conclusively of the Yellow Ford, which is the biggest defeat of English forces ever in Ireland. It was Hugh O'Neill's great victory in the 9 Years' War in 1598. My own work in Kinsale in County Cork with Paul O'Keefe relating to 1601. I'm sure you probably all have heard of the siege and battle of Kinsale where the Spanish come and the Irish lost. And it led to the complete conquest of Ireland for the first time in history. Other small bits and pieces have been done. The Boyne has had some investigations. And it's the only site that has any level of major protection, if you like, where they've turned it into a complete site. But that was not for the reasons of 1690, it was more to do with the Northern Ireland peace process. But they did some work in association with that and did some geophysical survey which found the old Bridge village. Aughrim, if any of you ever drive the Galway to Dublin Road, you're driving over a small section of the fringe of the Aughrim battlefield, the bloodiest battle in Irish history. From 1691. Significantly more important battle than the Boyne, actually. But in any event, there was detection done in advance of that route of a couple of fields that produced a small number of highly significant finds. Probably the closest in date to our current battlefield in terms of a major battlefield piece of work. But they found a small number of bullets. I think I did the analysis on them. I think there's 6 or 7 bullets and a grenade and some evidence of perhaps bodies stricken after the battle. Right? So remember these type of numbers now. I'll tell you about the numbers we got in Kinsale, and then we'll talk about the numbers that we got here in the last 3 days. There's lots of other things going on. You know, there's work on Martello towers, there's work on signal towers, Napoleonic defences. This is the ERA sign for Allied pilots when they were flying over Ireland to know that they were over the Irish Free State and not over Allied airspace. This was restored recently at Loop Head. Dan Snow, a historian in England, came in recently and dug Bud Wolf's Spitfire up in Donegal. He was an American pilot who served in the RAF. Dr. Heather Montgomery has done a lot recently on World War I training trenches in Ireland, but virtually nothing gets done in Ireland in relation to any of this type of history or heritage. We're far behind everywhere else, and some work in Stephen's Green and Moore Street as well. Nothing absolutely major or spectacular. A lot of the work that you see done and a lot of the finds are accidental. They come along because archaeology is being done for something else around the castle or something. But just to give you an idea of the type of things that once you approach these in a systematic manner that it can tell you, the siege and battle at Kinsale, which I've worked on since 1601, and I'm only going to spend a couple of minutes on this, but effectively the siege goes on for about 3 months. The Spaniards land in the town, the English surround them, the Irish come down from Ulster. There is a fairly quick battle in which the Irish are defeated and the Spanish surrender. The siege often gets forgotten in this story, but the siege is actually a very hard fought siege. The English talk about their men dying on dozens on a heap, and they talk about the latest supplies out of England are already spent, and by supplies they mean men. There are different days in terms of how you treat people. But we have been able to identify all of the major English siege camps around the town. This is a painting of the main English Lord Deputy's camp. And we used the exact same process that had been used on Vinegar Hill to try and identify and locate these places. None of this had any archaeological protection before we did the work on it. And my colleague Paul O'Keefe has taken some of the LiDAR data and that we've worked on together with all our field work, and we've identified on the ground, this is the outline of the main English camp, which was bigger than the walled city of Derry. Any of you ever been in Derry? This is bigger than the city of Derry. It was a town that was there for about 3 months. There was a turf house in it for the Lord Deputy, incredibly significant. We first identified that campsite by specifically going and looking for bullets that we knew the English would have dropped. So very similar methodology to what we're looking for here, and by locating them accurately. And these are some of the bullets on the left-hand side that we found that were dropped by English soldiers in 1601. And these bullets tell a story, even just looking at them. You see that they don't look normal, they're not fully round. These are all miscast or badly cast. And we think that one of the reasons they're like this is because the weather conditions were so terrible at the site. It's known that the weather conditions were awful, and that affects these bullets. And so that's giving us another added piece of information. We're also able to tell things like that some of these bullets were transported because of the indentations on them in barrels of bullets, and others were being made and cast on site. All of it is adding more detail to the story. This is Carrick Mines. For any of you if you were ever in Dublin in 2000 or 2002, you'd remember the controversy of Carrick Mines Castle. This was back in the days, it was probably the biggest controversy after Wood Quay in terms of archaeology, but it was a site that was excavated in advance of the M50 motorway that I worked on under the direction of Dr. Mark Clinton. And we were digging out in the castle area, had absolutely no expectation of finding anything to do with military or conflict archaeology, when around 20 centimetres under the sod of an agricultural field, literally under the sod, in the topsoil, we came across this mass grave. Like, it's unbelievably high in the ground. So we excavated them, and we found lots of different finds with them, which was unusual. One of the bodies had a number of coins that appeared to have been sewn into their clothing. It was a woman's body, where she had sewn the coins to try and hide them in her clothing. Another, there's an arm bone here. I don't know if you can see, this key is on the arm bone. So the key, also normally carried by women in a castle context because there wasn't many locked doors. A trusted lady was another one of the possessions that these people had. And what had happened here was that in March 1642, an English commander, a royalist English commander, had ridden out to the castle. One of the guys on the castle wall insulted him, and he decided he was going to take the castle by storm in a siege. During the siege that occurred as a result of that, this commander, Sir Simon Harcourt, was shot by a sniper and mortally wounded, and his men apparently went berserk, right? And they immediately stormed the castle and slaughtered everyone inside it. But from an analysis of these human remains, you can tell a lot. So you'll have heard the phrase, he was killed in cold blood, or she was killed in cold blood, right? To kill someone in cold blood, it's premeditated. And if you decide that you're going to execute someone, normally in military context, if it's a calm decision, you tend to do it in one way, right? You'll hang everybody, or you'll shoot everybody, or something like that, right? It's calculated. The analysis of this material showed that these people weren't killed like that. One of them, at least one of them, had been shot because they had a bullet in their body cavity. Another had been hacked down with a sword. Some of them had been in prone positions and had their arms up, and you find the sword marks on their arms as a result of that. Others had blunt force trauma. So in this period, and indeed this would have happened in 1798 as well, with single shot weapons, when they fired their weapon, they did a thing called reversing their musket, and they would use their muskets as a club, the butt end of the musket. That would have happened right on that hill as we see it. And we had people who had their heads bashed in literally with musket butts. You can see immediately this takes something like a few lines on a page in 1642 out of history and into something that's very personal. Like, there's women and children in this, and you can tell how they died. It's quite individual. And that's one of the other things that battlefield archaeology gives you, that you don't always get from accounts. When you see something, see some of these objects, these bullets were fired at individuals. Some of them may have struck individuals. When you find dropped material on battlefields, they were dropped by individuals. When you locate sites of intense conflict in a certain field, it changes your concept of what happened or occurred there. I suppose in relation to how I first became involved with the project, I was the archaeological side of a major initiative by the Department of the Environment, as was then. It changes its name all the time, I don't know what name it is, but this was about 10 years ago. The Department of the Environment initiated a programme called the Irish Battlefields Programme, which was designed to historically explore and attempt to map all the battlefields in Ireland. So we undertook that in conjunction with Enniclon, who did the historical work, and we did a significant number of battlefields. We were able to map in the region of about 75 battlefields, I think. And you can imagine what dominated the whole Wexford scene on this. It was all 1798 stuff. And that would have been my first interaction with Vinegar Hill and the really impressive remains you have here. But when we were doing that, if you think of Vinegar Hill, you may think, right, it's the area where they fought. That's what a battlefield is. That's not the way an archaeologist would necessarily look at a battlefield. Archaeologists tend to look at things as landscapes. So they're made up of lots of different things. So there's the field of battle itself, but there's the place where people encamped, approach routes, the retreat routes, the buildings. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the battlefield of Fuchs Mills, which is an incredibly important, I believe, battlefield as well. My favourite part of that site is General Sir John Moore, the night before the battle, camped at Longgrave House. And he marched his men down from Longgrave House, through the estate road and out where they fight the United Irishmen. And if you go there today, that's what that estate road looks like. I think it's one of the most evocative sites on any battlefield I've seen, because you can almost picture a line of redcoats marching down that road at Fuchs Mills on their way to the battle. That was taken about 10 years ago. Probably looks something the same, I hope it does anyway. But that's his approach route to the battle, but that is part of the battlefield of Fuchs Mills. And it's about a mile away from the actual engagement itself. But one of the other things we have to consider is how they've changed. Battlefields don't look the same today as they did in 1798 or in 1601 or whenever it is. Some of them have changed more than others, and you have to do a lot of work to try and determine what exactly has changed. So, you know, if you're dealing with the Battle of Kinsale in 1601, that's an unenclosed landscape. That's before people were putting in an awful lot of hedgerows and things like that, right? So you have to imagine that they weren't there when you're trying to assess a battle. But when you're looking at somewhere like Vinegar Hill, we know that the vast bulk of the field boundaries that you see up there, all the little laneways, all those fields are all an intrinsic part of the battlefield. They were all lines that were defended by United Irishmen. Each one of them is like a defensive trench. So that's the way you should view those fields when you go up there in the laneways. They're really important elements of the battle. Things like reduction in woodland cover. A lot of Irish battles are fought in passes, and people always think that passes are mountains. In Ireland, they're nearly always bogs. Go figure. Although we've done well with the rain things, it is quite a boggy country out here. Things like land improvement, you know, so areas that might have been wet, people might be talking in an account to say an area was wet, would now have been improved. Development is a major issue, and development has impacted, and we now absolute certainty know that parts of the Vinegar Hill battlefield have been destroyed by development quite recently, on the basis of the results that we've got in the last 2 days. So it's very important in relation to development as well, where places expand. That's a major issue in Kinsale. And of course, there are also sites of memory and commemoration. This is in New Ross. The mural here, 1798, of course, is extremely powerful in relation to this. You all know that very well. In Wexford, I was recently doing work in Cork, where they have lots of 1798 memorials, although I think you could fairly argue that you definitely have the upper hand in relation to 1798. Once we've taken all that into account, what we try and do is reconstruct the battlefield landscape, and there's a process to doing this. So we don't just go out and go, right, there's Vinegar Hill, we'll head up and see what we find. You can't do that. It has to be a very measured process. It starts out by looking at the primary accounts. Who has written about this battlefield and what do they say? You actually have to almost ignore secondary accounts when you're looking at archaeological work. You have to see if someone said, well, we charged up to a ditch and this happened, or we advanced down a road a mile, then we crossed a stream, then we crossed 2 fields. That type of stuff is allowing you to look at the landscape and go, okay, they did this, this and this is where things might have happened. You look at modern cartography, we're very lucky with Vinegar Hill in that our first detailed mapping takes place only about 35 or so years after this battle is fought. 1798 is fantastic for that the first edition Ordnance Survey mapping is very, very close in time. So we know that the fields we're looking at are very close to what was there on the day of battle. Really important for 1798. You need to know how people move and how quickly they move. And I believe we'll be finding that out on Sunday, isn't it? With the
3rd of September.
The 3rd of September, with the march of the Reserve Defence Forces for 1798. Where it's possible, contemporary cartography as well. Again, Vinegar Hill has a number of these. There's a number of contemporary maps drawn by participants in the battle, most of which are quite confusing, to be honest. But all of which provide you information on where things happen. They're often annotated and they're giving you different aspects of information. And the final thing you need is a good pair of walking shoes, because you cannot understand the battlefield unless you walk it intensively. You have to be all over it to try and find out what's going on. Without having done all of this, and this takes a significant amount of time, you shouldn't be going near a battlefield. You shouldn't be wandering around willy-nilly trying to find things, because you have no process for doing it. And the lads have done a huge amount of work in the 1798 Centre on identifying locations with respect to this battlefield, and it was also something that we touched on as part of the Battlefields project. Okay, that's the kind of school bit out of the way now. We can go into the project itself. Jackie already gave an overview of the project itself, but the longest day funded by Wexford County Council, 4-year research programme, and it's run by a voluntary committee chaired by Dr. Ronan O'Flaherty. And so it is they who appointed our team to have a look specifically at the metal detection. The project aims, again, just to recap, identify the extent of the battlefield, the areas of fighting, the location of structures, weaponry, domestic wear, engagement, and fighting in Enniscorthy town, identify possible mass graves, and we've seen how important they can be, and set standards for future battlefield archaeological research in Ireland. And I make no bones about saying that is really a significant interest in mine. I've spent an awful lot of my career banging on about this stuff, and nobody seems to really care about it in many respects. And this has shown, particularly this week, how exceptionally important. It's as valuable as any medieval or prehistoric archaeology, and significantly rarer than any of that archaeology that you see in Ireland, and deserves to be treated as such. But apart from us doing our survey in the last week and in May, there has been absolute reams of work that's taken place. The LiDAR survey, the Architectural Survey of Enniscorthy in 1798, photogrammetry of the Vinegar Hill windmill, so that's taking incredibly detailed imagery of the windmill itself to give it a 3D record and identify anything like impact scarring. The underwater archaeological survey of the river in the vicinity of the stone bridge, again to try and find out where deposits might be, because we know there was fighting near there, so where the river is depositing material, where it's scouring material out, all that sort of information is now known as a result of that work. The folklore survey that Jackie is working on at the moment, to try and find out what's the local knowledge in relation to and what's the local memory of these type of engagements. The geophysical survey, which we'll touch on a small piece of momentarily, that Dr. James Bonsall carried out, and then our detection survey is the last component. So you can see that it's a cog in a wheel. It isn't the be all and end all of the project. It's just one more element building towards the whole. Okay, you probably will struggle to see this, but to get on to the battle itself, and I'm sure you're all very familiar with the battle, but I'll give you a brief account of it. This, just to give you some background, is the Irish Battlefields Project map that we produced as part of that battlefield survey. To orientate you, this is the crest of the hill itself. The blue hashing is the approximate area of the United Irishmen's camp. During our analysis of that, we felt that it was clear that the United Irishmen outer defences were significantly further out from the hill. That the battlefield itself is not just the hill. There's townland boundaries out here that we were reckoning matched those in some of the descriptions, and we think that was the initial outer defence. So the battle took place on the 24th of June, when a force of between 10 and 15,000 Crown troops under the command of General Lake attacked the main insurgent encampment on Vinegar Hill, which we can see out the window. The camp there was thought to have anything between 20 and 30,000 people, but that included large numbers of women and children. So the actual numbers of fighting men there isn't determined. The amount of, for example, firearms they had isn't determined. We know something about artillery that they had. But to move on the eve of battle, Lake stationed his troops within the domains of Salisbury House, 3.5 kilometres northeast of Vinegar Hill. He had a force of between 5,000 and 6,000 troops with him personally. He was joined there by troops under Needham, who carried out a forced march from Oulart to give Lake a combined force of approximately 10,000 troops, though some claimed he had up to 15,000. Always worked, we were chatting about this today, most of the men he had under his command were Irish as well. So we often forget that. They're not all, it's effectively Irish fighting Irish. That happens even abroad. It seems to be Irish versus Irish. But to move on to the day of the battle, hostilities commenced at approximately 4 AM when Lake's artillery began firing on insurgent lines with grape and explosive shells. And he had split into 3 columns. So we have Duff, who we estimate was attacking from here, Loftus moves his artillery onto a key position identified in the accounts as Green Hill, which we believe to be it's almost imperceptible, this hill, but it's a significant one, where he was able to open fire, and this is called enfilade fire, where you can fire along the line. This is the United Irishman line. You can fire along the line, and he enfiladed their line, and he wiped out a load of these guys with his artillery fire, which seems to have been a key moment. They're bombarding the hill for a number of hours. The psychological impact of this, you can imagine. There are people up there with their families, with their children. Imagine what it's like to be under a storm of shells. Psychologically, I think that has to play a major role in the battle. Lake is with Dundas over here, and this is the area that we're going to be looking at in a bit more detail in a moment. But hostilities commence at 4 when Lake begins firing with grape and explosive shells. In response, the United Irishmen spread out in a line along the northern slope, taking shelter in trenches that ran across the side of the hill and behind the ditches, behind the field boundaries that you see on the hill today. That's where guys were hiding when this fire was coming down on their heads. The casualties from the bombardment were heavy, and the United Irishmen had no effective means to respond. Although they did have 13 artillery pieces, it doesn't seem clear if they used them. Right? After the bombardment, after he effectively softened them up, you hear this term, particularly in contemporary parlance, the assault is launched. At the same time, another group under Johnson is coming in the other side, and Johnson has advanced through the town, and there's heavy fighting over the bridge at the back of it. So you have all these people on the hill who are in danger now of being cut off. On 3 sides, they have columns about to attack them. There's people coming through and escorting, right? Needham, who we're going to find out why he was late when the Reserve Defence Forces do their march. Needham was supposed to come up here and cut off any potential retreat, right? That was the plan. So, just to go on to the main fighting, Dundas on the hill began his assault. This is the one that we want to be listening to in relation to what we found here. Dundas began his assault on the east side of the hill where a low ridge ran. At the same time, Loftus attacked the northern slope and Duff attacked the riverside slope. Lake accompanied Dundas, so the commander, who was a veteran of the American War of Independence, interestingly, was on the east side, and he has a horse killed under him during the assault. The insurgents made a number of efforts to break the circle by charging the advancing Crown forces, particularly on the position of Lake and Dundas, particularly here. There's counter charges coming in, and we'll have a look. We'll have a look at some of them. Effectively, anyway, what happens is they do break resistance, and the United Irishmen and people, they flee in this direction. It's sought because Needham is not in position. The summit of the hill is supposedly taken by light troops under a Colonel Campbell, and again we'll be hearing a small bit about him in a little while. And they retreat out, and there's other significant areas that don't go into too much, like Beale's Barn and things that relate to the battle. But this is the key fighting, and the one that we want to concentrate on is here, right? We are just going to hop back momentarily to talk about the Geophysical Survey and the aftermath of the battle. And it was carried out by Earthsound Geophysics, led by Dr. James Bonsall. And there was a lot of different aims for the geophysics. It was done over a wide area, but one of them was to see if there was any mass graves. So a lot of the bodies were left up there. We have accounts from the time. So one of them says, "The man described the scene of slaughter perpetrated on Vinegar Hill and pointed out to me how the burial of the slain was effected. A deep trench was dug at the base of the eminence. The bodies were laid therein, and the earth and stones from above tumbled down to fill the excavation." Okay, another account. "At the declivity of the hill there is a vast pit in which the bodies of the unfortunate men who were killed in this ruinous and fatal contest are deposited, to the number, as I was informed, of 500. General Sir John Moore, who'd been busy at Fuchs Mill so didn't make it here in time for the battle, wrote when he arrived here that Vinegar Hill stinks of dead bodies half buried." Another account. "Numerous pits crammed with dead bodies on Vinegar Hill seemed on some spots actually elastic as we stood on them." Another account. "I walked one evening on Vinegar Hill. I had to move the earth with my foot, and the skulls of the buried slain appeared in almost every part, not entirely rock. Tufts of human hair lay thick on the surface of the earth and on the bushes and crags of mountains." Right, so pretty strong stuff. Again, always worth considering this type of stuff when you're on a site like Vinegar Hill. Geophysics itself is what we would call as archaeologists non-invasive survey. Non-invasive means that we're not doing anything to dig, right? So there's no disturbance of the ground, you're not doing anything. Archaeology, is important to remember, is destructive by its nature. When archaeologists dig something, when anybody digs something, you destroy it. What archaeologists do that say metal detectorists don't do, one of the things is we record it. You have to record things. And so you can interpret it, you can study it, you can learn from it as a result of that. But geophysics is non-invasive, and effectively, this is probably a simplification that James would be horrified by, but its intent is to allow you to see what's under the ground. So you're looking for signals that are telling you that there might be ditches in the ground, holes in the ground, there might be stone walls in the ground. These all give you different signals on your machines, right? If anybody is interested in learning more about radiometer and earth resistance survey, James will take questions afterwards on them. But one of the remits that Earthsound had was to look for mass graves. And I'm terrible with this type of stuff, right? I really don't know. These are some of the results. So if you're familiar with Vinegar Hill, this is the car park area. Yeah? Everybody know the car park? You drive up the laneway here. These are the results from the resistance. And you can see some of the area here, which thankfully James interprets for us. This is real science-based stuff. And it revealed a number of pits. So now we don't know what's in those pits, but these green areas are pits that were identified as a result of the geophysics. So potentially they relate to the 1798 battle. And we can be absolutely certain, based on numbers, that they're not the only ones. That there would have been dead people buried in many other locations. Okay, so we'll move on to the license detection survey then. You'll notice every time we say detection survey, we say licensed. Right? Metal detection is illegal in the Republic of Ireland. You can own a metal detector, but you cannot use it. If you use it and you're not an archaeologist licensed by the National Monument Service and the National Museum of Ireland, you're breaking the law. The reason for that is that every archaeological object that has no known owner, which none of them do, is the cultural property of the people of Ireland. So if you go and you dig stuff up without recording it or doing anything, the view, and it's the correct view, is that you're stealing it from the people of Ireland. Right? This is particularly true of battlefields and military sites, because people will go out to these sites and wander up into a field and they will detect, and we notice this happen on the hill, and they will dig up musket balls, and then they'll head off with them. And if we come and we're trying to do what we're doing, and I think I've shown you how you can reconstruct things based on finds, and we'll have a look at exactly what you can tell from the patterning of the finds, you're destroying the ability for that story to be told forevermore. The only way you're ever going to add to the story of Vinegar Hill now is through archaeology. That's the only way. We know all the historical accounts. So it's the only new resource available to us. And if you illegally detect, you're destroying it. So it's very important that it's done in a licensed manner. And so we have to write up a method statement. We have to draw where we're doing all our transects. We have to say how long we're going to be on the ground, what we're going to do with all the finds afterwards, what type of analysis we're going to do. All of that has to take place before we're granted a license to carry out this work. The other thing that's important about it is we're very systematic in the way we do things. So again, you could wander out into a field with your detector and kind of stagger over the place and, oh, I'll go over here by this ditch and this is great and, oh, yeah, that looks like an easy spot to go. And you could come back and you could say, okay, well, I have 10 musket balls and I'll say they're all from that field. But you can't do anything with that information because you haven't been systematic. You have to do everything proportionately or your results are completely invalid. Right? So I'll be showing you how we do that as well. All of the finds that we get are plotted by GPS to sub-centimetre accuracy. So it's all taking satellites into the ground. So every one of these objects you see here, we could go up tomorrow and we could put it back in the exact place that we found it if we wanted to, with the details we have. I've gone on about the international team we have. We're very fortunate, particularly with the guys from Cotswold who have extensive experience of battlefield archaeology. They're just back from Waterloo, so particularly have their eye in for this period of stuff. So it's very good to have them on board. But the methodology, have any of you seen us up there doing any of the work? Yeah. So you'll have seen a lot of flags, yeah, right? So there's a reason behind that. I was talking about it important to be systematic. So these flags, you can see they're colour coded. They're set out at 5-metre intervals along a line, and the detectorist has to walk between them so that they're covering an exact proportionate area in a straight line. So it's like a survey grid. So it's really exact what we're doing, right? And we are doing that along all the fields that we're doing at 2.5 metres wide. So every 2.5 metres, we're walking a line up and down the field trying to find material. We have a strategy here. Normally, in an archaeological context in Ireland, you would look for everything. Every signal that you get, you try and dig it up, right? Because it's of archaeological importance. And that indeed is true here as well. But our main goal with these phases of works has been to prove the existence of battlefield archaeology on the hill and to get some sense of the nature of it. We haven't been seeking to retrieve everything in the ground relating to the battle. That's going to be more work and that is required. So what we did is we're looking in the main for what we would call non-ferrous, so not iron. Particularly we're looking for lead, because lead in a battlefield that was fought in the age of gunfire is the most obvious signal that you're going to get that there was a battle there, because you're going to find lead bullets. And each one of these metals gives you a different signal on a metal detector. So you can tell if something is a piece of iron falling off a tractor. Theoretically, you can tell if it's fallen off a tractor, a bit of iron, or if it's going to be a lead object, or if it's going to be something else. Unfortunately, things like Red Bull cans and things have come into play a significant amount on top of the hill.
Please stop selling Dutch gold.
I'm sorry to say, lads, there's quite a few alcoholic beverages drunk up there. In any event.
We also have your driver as well if you lost it on the golf club.
Yeah. We got a full set of tools there as well. We got a hammer and chisel, the whole lot.
A set of spanners.
When we find something, when we're walking these transects, we bag it and flag it. Right, so we get it, we have bags, finds bags that we put there, you see them here behind us. The find is put in it, there's unique numbers put on each one of these finds, and then they're flagged so that the GPS comes along behind. Every one of them is inputted straight away with its unique code and everything into the GPS equipment. So we're actually able to upload every evening the results, the plots of the survey that you'll see. You're going to see the plot from the survey as it was about 5 or 6 hours ago, is what you're going to see in a couple of minutes. And we retain those finds. So, you know, if I was doing it for the laugh up there, where I was finding stuff, number one, I'm not going to do any specialist analysis on it, so I'm not going to know anything about what fired this or why it was fired. I'm not going to do any conservation, and of course it's then lost to us for the future. It's lost for the centre if they ever want to put on display material in specific locations. It's lost in 20 or 30 years when archaeological and scientific techniques will have moved on and will be able to tell us more about this material than we currently are able to tell. So it's very important that it's kept. And all of this material is the property, ultimately, the National Museum of Ireland on behalf of the state make all the decisions in relation to material. So, we've been here before. We were here in May 2017, when the weather was equally nice, to carry out the first phase survey. And I'll show you the fields that we did that on. And we concentrated on the fields that were under pasture. So we got license permission to do a large proportion of the hill that I'll show you in a second. But there was 2 areas of it. Some of it was under crop. And in May, that hadn't been harvested, so we couldn't access that. So we were restricted to the areas under pasture. An important one, many of you will be aware there was a golf course built on Vinegar Hill. That golf course has destroyed all evidence of the battle that's there, right? So that was an immensely destructive thing. That means that metal detecting it, because even if you do find some material that was displaced, it's nowhere near its original location. So it's effectively a void area now on the battlefield. That's the importance in relation to development. One of the things, and we were very hopeful that we were going to wander on and find loads of evidence of fighting, and that is not what happened. We found 1 bullet during that survey, and we were there for a week. That isn't to say that what we found wasn't significant though, because we did find a significant number of other finds, and we see some of them down here, things like keys, buckles, little buttons, that are suggestive of the encampment that related to the United Irishman encampment out in those fields. So far from being a negative, really it's a positive. You can say, okay, we know there's probably not a lot of key fighting going in here. We did have questions about it, and there are questions that will remain. We think that significant areas of that side of the hill have been illegally metal detected. That was the impression we got when we were working on them. There are areas of there are fields that haven't been ploughed in talking to some of the landowners in many, many years. And to give you a kind of a fairly basic science lesson in relation to metal detected finds, if you have a layer of soil like this, right, and it's filled with finds, and it's never been touched, there's no ploughing or anything like that, and somebody comes and illegally metal detects the same field, say for 1 day a year for 20 years, they'll clean that level of any finds that they want, right? If you go into a ploughed field, you have a better chance, because ploughing pulls up deeper objects that might be missed, right? So we were particularly keen to get into ploughed fields because we felt, because there was so few, we expected a few more bullets. We got, as I say, good evidence of the camp, but so few bullets that we thought there has been illegal detection on the hill. And talking to a few people up there, they said there's been detectors up there. So these, again, they have thieved that sections of that part of the battlefield. We do have other questions though that we'd like to return to in future years, if we can. The ground conditions, there's a possibility that there's more material that's massed underneath the soil in these unploughed fields that might reveal more evidence of the fighting, so we want to explore that. So just to give you, this is our plot of everywhere we've detected so far. We did 5 hectares the first week, and we'll have done around 10 hectares by the end of it. Again, to orientate you, this is the laneway you drive up to the car park, this is the hill here. And the fields that we did in May are down here. This is our finds plot distribution. So you see we still found plenty of stuff. These are all colour coded for different things. We detected directly underneath the car park, where we found a couple of reenactor buttons. Again, this is actually turned into a big issue on battlefield archaeology as well.
I told you who owned that button.
You did. Reenactment uniforms are getting so good and so accurate that if the reenactments take place on the actual original ground of the battlefield, if they drop material, it can look the same and can be really hard to differentiate. So in a lot of battlefields now, reenactment is actually banned on the original battlefield. You have to do it elsewhere because of the impact on the site.
Roland is shaking his head and tutting at me as well.
We were able to identify that was definitely a reenactor button because it had a bit of twine or string left on it, so it would have been pretty good survival from 1798. This seems to be the favourite field for illicit drinking, by the way. Absolutely riven with cans. So there are the 3 fields we did, and as I say, suggestions, and this is all the golf course. So this is all effectively a blank now because of the work, which is disappointing. But anyway, these were the fields that were under crop that we wanted to come back to this time, and we're hopeful of at least doubling our musket ball haul. 2. So the phase 2 survey we're halfway through at the moment. That is to say, they were the areas that were under crop in May. So it's a lot better for us. It's way easier to dig this ground. It's been ploughed, so there's a lot of variables that are in our favour. And it's just been an archaeological bonanza in terms of what we've been getting up there. Extensive evidence for both military activity and the encampment. And already, in fact, it was this, I think, midway through the second day, the largest and in my view, the most significant battlefield archaeological survey results in the Republic of Ireland to date. So, anyway, I think we've been there a few minutes when the first bullet came up. And we were going, oh, this is very positive. And then in fairness, it was about an hour before the second one came up, but then we got another one. And then we got another one. Then people started to get very happy about finding it. Some people started to get very happy about finding it.
It's exciting.
Some people who find lots of musket balls are a bit more. But they just started coming up more and more and more. And at the end of today's count, we have nearly 60 lead balls, which is by far the biggest assemblage. The work I did at Kinsale, we got 23. And this is just, it's particularly related to one location that we're going to look at. So, to go back to what we were looking at, the density of the finds has been so extreme that we're actually not making as much progress as we thought, because there's just so much archaeology coming out. So to orientate you again, this is the laneway up to the car park. These are the fields that we have been working in most of the time. The black dots is lead shot. So you can see that there's activity all around here. But if you look here, the first 4 hits, first 4 excavated finds out of this were all lead shot. And it's not just material dropped. We found, as I say, evidence of the encampment, so we know that the lads were camped there. But what we have here is we have significant evidence of combat. We know that there is fighting going on in this direction up the hill. And what can we say? Now, we have to do lots of different analysis. This is the field in question. This is the major field. That big clump of black dots that you saw is all around here. I draw your attention to one thing. It's kind of hard to see on this. You see a shoulder in the field. There's a little rise here. Many of you probably walk dogs and things in this field. The shoulder is in that field as well. That seems to be a significant feature. You can just make out the windmill at the back of the hill. What we appear to have here are, this is our early interpretation of it, is a firing line that is setting up in and around the base of this field, where guys are advancing in a line, maybe a full line, maybe in skirmish line, and they are firing up the hill. And we know this because not only have we dropped bullets, we have bullets that have been impacted at really high velocity, really close range. Again, you can see some of them afterwards. And what that does to a spherical ball when it hits things like stone or stony earth at close range is it effectively obliterates the ball. It will pancake it. We have balls that have shattered off, which takes extreme force. So we know that they're being fired close to this area. So we know there's firing going all the way up towards the hill. We believe it to be in this direction. We've got at least 3 different calibers. Again, we haven't analysed the material, we're just doing this from sight. So 3 different gun types, if you like. Okay? So a couple of different musket types probably and pistols. As I say, potential firing lines. Really significant find that came up that you'll see today, which is a piece of grape shot, which is an anti-personnel shot fired out of an artillery piece, effectively to scatter iron balls everywhere and rip people apart. And they were taking them in probably close. That was found in around that region. So this picture is building up in this field, and it's been extended into the next field where there's some more material coming up to show that there is really, really significant fighting going on in that area. And again, early days, literally, but this would appear to be the line of Dundas's attack. That's the initial interpretation. I'm going to, because I didn't put it in, I'm going to fly back through all the smiling faces to where I put in the battlefield thing. These are the type of things that make it significant. If you look at this map, we have placed Dundas's attack here. We know that Lake and Dundas came up the roadway, right? The evidence that we're getting, and again this is very early days, but it opens it up as a, I would think, a probability, suggests that what they did was they moved onto the lower slope of this hill. Anyway, this is one of my initial thoughts on it, and I think we all have some different thoughts on it in the early days. But move into this, the saddle of the hill, form a line and are moving this way up. So these are the fields where we're seeing action. And just to give, we have some accounts that, you know, give us a flavour now. We're talking about things like grape shot and stuff being fired. But anyway, finding that they could hold out no longer, they retreated from the top of the hill, which they hitherto considered impregnable, and took another position on the lower hill on the east side. The rebels formed themselves on the lower hill, took shelter behind the hedges, and bid defiance to the king's troops. They maintained a heavy fire on the light brigade commanded by Colonel Campbell, but nothing could withstand their valour and intrepidity of these troops. They rushed on them like furies, charging them in their entrenchments. So again, that's a bit late in the battle, so again, that's happening in this vicinity. Another account, at the same time, Generals Lake, Dundas and Wilford, with Colonel Campbell's light infantry, were advancing up the hill on the southeast side and were firmly opposed by the rebels, who maintained a very brisk fire on them, retreating at the same time from one hedge to another, till they were driven over the hill. On that occasion, General Lake had a horse shot from under him. The movements of the two columns were so well timed that they met at the same moment at the top of the hill. Archibald McLaren, this is a particularly apt one given what we were talking about. A large party of them, this United Irishmen, attempted to force their way on the left of the hill. The Light Brigade under Colonel Campbell, who occupied that post, saluted them with a shower of hailstones, something harder than boiled peas. He's talking about this type of munition. Drove them back and pursued them up the hill. In their retreat, they were severely galled by the grape shot, and which few from the field pieces belonging to the Dumbartonshire Regiment. So we may actually have evidence of that very thing that he's talking about. You can see, and we have been here in this really intense zone for what day is today? Wednesday. For effectively about 2.5 days. This is what this is revealed. Now you can only imagine, if you start systematically going all over the place, how you start to build mass pictures of everything that's occurred on a battlefield like Vinegar Hill. I'll just move. See all the happy faces again. That was the what we know section. And I'm going to finish it up now. What we know, and we'll probably know an awful lot more as well by the time we finish, but we have incredibly significant new information on the battlefield. We have a lot of evidence that extensive survey now is going to reveal an awful lot more detail about what happened here in 1798. There's lots of questions about what happened here. Like, what effect did the artillery have on the United Irishmen on the hill? How firm was the resistance on the hill at the time? Like, how well were they able to hold back the advancing British or not? You know, these are the type of questions that we can answer, or at least seek to answer using archaeology. One of the immediate things, for me anyway, I can't walk into either of these fields now, having found what we found, and look at them in the same way. You know, you can see, you now understand a bit. You can look at this field. If you were standing in this field in the day of the battle, you know that there was a line of troops at the bottom firing up the hill towards you. You know that that happened. You know that there was artillery firing up this hill that if you were standing there, you would have been pulverised by if you were there. And you know that's what happened to people who were there on the day of the battle, that every one of the projectiles and everything that was found does that. It tells us other things. This is the view. The windmill is behind us, looking down the hill. And what's immediately apparent now that we know that this is a key portion of the battle is that a major part of it has been destroyed. The next field down towards the road has a new development on it, and all the soil has been stripped back off of it. These houses on this side have destroyed a portion of the battlefield, and the school over here has almost certainly destroyed significant portions of the battlefield. So again, it offers us an opportunity to see, okay, we now know what we have here, we know what we've lost, and it gives us an opportunity to decide what's important in relation to future decisions. But I think overall you would have to say that it's a positive thing, though, an extremely positive thing, because it also offers up great opportunities for interpretation and renewed interpretation of individual parts of the battlefield where we now know certain things happen. So you can go from the little laneway and look at these fields. For many people, as I say, many of you walk their dogs and everything, and maybe explore. That's part of the battlefield. But one of the things, and again to reiterate and to end it on it, is that, for example, this is the first, it's going to be the biggest amount of media attention a battlefield archaeology project has got in Ireland. And I used to be a curator in the National Museum of Ireland. Metal detecting material was. And you would swim in military artefacts, because illegal detectors go to battlefields because it's not a ring fort and it's not Newgrange, and it's easier to do it there. And they take colossal amounts of it out of the ground, and in doing so, they destroy it, as we spoke about. So you have to be extra vigilant to make sure that if you ever see anybody up there, what they're doing is preventing us from ever telling stories like this again, or knowing what was going on in these fields if they're taking that material. It's very important to report them. But yeah, let's end on a positive. I mean, it's by far and away the most significant finding in relation to battlefield archaeology in Ireland. And I think it's going to hopefully make significant inroads in people appreciating what can be revealed. And it's it's people of Wexford County Council in the 1798 century who've led the way in it. And I think it's a site that you can be immensely proud of. Okay, thanks very much.
Before we take any questions from the floor, can I just thank you all for joining us here this evening. You really are hearing breaking news, because the research team are just sitting here looking at those maps as well. We've never seen those before. So to James and his team, who literally at lunchtime or in the evening time upload all of that information, we're not sitting here waiting for it, it's there for us. So you're seeing that the same as we're seeing it for the first time. I suppose on a personal note, I hope you can appreciate why we've had to tread incredibly carefully with some of the information that Damian has given you here tonight. It's hard for us to process, it's hard for us to be sure about it. So we've had to be very, very careful, and I know there's been, you know, why do we not know what's going on? Why won't they tell us what's going on? It's because we didn't know ourselves. And the worst thing that we can do is charge off and make mad, crazy statements that we've had to go back from and go, actually, sorry, no, that wasn't it, sorry. So that's why we've had to be so very careful and build up that. It's a bit like, I said today, it's a bit like 100 keys on a desk with a box. And we've had to go through all of those locks, and literally only on Tuesday did we open that box, and all of this stuff came flooding out, and you've seen it here now. So like when Damian tells you they were here in May for a week, you can't imagine the disappointment that we had that week going on.
We were always upbeat though, Jackie.
No,
we were.
We were going, oh my God, that's going to be the dearest musket ball ever in creation. Yeah, please take off the good weather. And as Damian said, all those finds all add to our knowledge, but we feel the pressure of giving you something, and giving the town council something, and giving the Wexford County Council to justify your faith in us. And literally in the last 72 hours, it's delivered. It really has. So we haven't thought that through yet. So you're seeing it all very raw there, but we'll come back to it. So a little bit of housekeeping. I just have to pass on the apologies of Councillor John O'Rourke, who can't be here tonight, but sends his best wishes. Again, we owe a great amount of thanks to the landowners. Without their support of Larry Kerman and Pat McGee in particular, none of this would be happening. So we really are indebted to them as well. Again, to Wexford County Council, to Enniscorthy Municipal District Council for the faith that you've shown in us and the opportunity you've given us to go and do our work, that we can now present this to you today, just very raw. There are events here next week as well for Heritage Week, because I can't work a diary, so I put all my events on next week instead of this week. So I'm here next week, next Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday and Saturday, with a big huge map that if you have seen any of those artefacts, anything like that, in any of the environs of Enniscorthy, please come down and stick a sticker on the map, because that too will add to our knowledge. Because we know people came across stuff while they were building their houses or while they were out in the back gardens. And that's fine. We don't want to see the artefact, we don't want to know where it is now, we just want to know where it was when it was found. So I'm here Monday afternoon, Tuesday morning, Wednesday afternoon, Saturday morning, so hopefully that will accommodate everybody. And I'm still collecting the folklore of it as well, so we'd really love to hear your stories about the rebellion as well. If you can't remember everything I've told you, because I can't even remember to put it on in the right week, please go to our Facebook page, Vinegar Hill Battlefield, and all of those details will be there. So, just to reiterate what Damian said, if you're putting out the pictures on Facebook or Twitter, that's absolutely no problems at all. Just say that they were, the information was part of a licensed detection survey. And again, as Damian said, if you see anybody up on that hill with anything that looks like a metal detector or a trowel or anything that they shouldn't have up there, please do call the guards, because we have called them before and they've been very supportive of us. So, you know, you won't be ringing them up and they'll go, what are you on about? Because they will be familiar with it. So again, thank you very much to Damian for being able to say things that we couldn't possibly say, and for giving us all the really hot off the press information. So another round of applause. So
if any of you want to see any of the finds as well, they're up here, and some of them are up here.
yeah. So the part they've all been dreading most, the bit they haven't practiced. So, does anyone want to ask him anything?
Yeah, you're concentrating on lead. Cannonballs, to the best of my knowledge, are iron. Would you be missing cannonballs?
Oh, absolutely. And well, there's a couple of things. So, yeah, it's about you have to kind of marry a few things like time and resources and everything, right? And you have to look at where our base level is. So our base level is 0. We have no material. So the reason you want to go in and look for, effectively what you really want to be looking for is a signal type that you know the likelihood is going to be, or there's a significant chance that it is going to be related to the event that you're looking for, which is the battlefield. Right? The problem with the iron, when you're doing the first phase survey, is that everything is iron. So we would probably be in the first fields 20 yards up if you were digging everything. So, but what you do when you're doing the lead survey is you're identifying areas where there's specific events happening that you, like those fields that we've done aren't done. You know, you would go back to them again, you would find more material, you would be looking specifically for different things. So the field that we were in there now where we found the grape, that field has to be done again on full metal to try and find all of that. So, like, absolutely, we're not clearing it all. Like, it's not like there's nothing left there.
Is grape lead or iron?
No, it's iron.
It's iron.
Yeah. So even though we're discriminating it out, we're not doing it with a setting. We're visually looking at the readings. So we are digging up some iron as a result of that. So that's why we got that. But absolutely, these tend to be really long-term projects, you know, when you're doing these, because it takes a long time to cover a field with the intensity that you need to, and then you have to revisit it with a number of different techniques and avenues to try and find all that stuff out.
Damian, I presume the whole site is protected now, is it?
What is its level of protection?
No,
Just the windmill is the national monument.
Yeah.
So development could still go on.
I imagine so. Yeah.
It's protected, but the county council has the responsibility as a recognised battlefield site to keep an eye on that and make sure that inappropriate development doesn't take place. But it's not protected as it would be under the national monument.
There's virtually no battlefields that have any level of protection. No. Some of them have been put on a register so that development tends to have controls so that there will be archaeology done. But it's not.
So when you complete this week that you're here in Enniscorthy and you go with your findings to Wexford County Council, where does it go from there then?
I don't know.
The county council actually commissioned this, so they're the ones who want this information, and they've specifically said they want so that they can protect the hill in future. So they have had briefings all the way through this whole process, and this will be the latest one to be given to them that will flesh out that picture for them. So certainly they're looking at this specifically from the purpose of how do I protect the hill for future generations.
Just an example is the walkway up to the hill. There's always been a thought of expanding that to allow buses up,
Yeah.
and just to see the possible grave site that we could have been destroying if we'd done that. So that was one of the main reasons why we needed the information, which
Yeah.
that's significant.
Absolutely, yeah. It's only through that kind of landscape, because and in fairness and in defence of everybody, like, I mean, how are you to know, really, you know, unless you do that type of, you're never going to know what's important and what isn't important. It's just,
I just got a question there, sir. Just concerning the casualties for the 21st of June 1798, they're giving it as 86, and if you look at the right-hand flank of the rebel line, all the casualties are around there for the British. There are 28 wounded and 6 dead.
right, yeah.
And there's one of them 6 dragoons killed there. And for the centre of the hill, there's only one of the Dumbarton shirt.
Yeah, so the heaviest casualty in the area that we're
on
fighting
the right-hand flank, but the extreme right-hand flank over the hill. Over the hill, past the houses, over the hill, on the extreme right-hand flank over that hill.
Right.
That's where the heaviest of fighting was, because the casualties are given for there.
And you can see as well, like, I mean, look at the tiny area we've done and the results we've got.
Yeah.
So and the scale of the actual field, if you like.
Yeah.
I mean, you can see how you would have to just keep at it, going all the way to get out the full picture.
And another thing that just concerned that as well is the commander of the Crown Forces in Wicklow before General Needham and Colonel Sturrock took over was General Hardin, and he was present at Vinegar Hill, and he has done the most extreme map ever done at Vinegar Hill, and it shows the rebel lines where they were and the placement of the artillery.
Okay.
Yeah, his eyewitness account is the most detailed map that was ever made of Vinegar Hill. Shows the placement of the British guns as well. Yeah, and another thing just concerning that, there's a big lump of cavalry right in the middle of the British line, straight under the hill, and there's more cavalry to the flank. The 6 Dragoon Guards, there are 6 Dragoons, the 5th Dragoon Guards, and what's the other one? I can't think of the cavalry.
What was the average range of a cannon firing a ball in those times?
Anyone
It depends. The 6-pounders can go out to up to, depending on what they're firing. Depends on what they're firing. So
just a couple of guys I was under the impression that the fired cannons from a field at Salisbury House, that would be impossible.
Yeah, if you're going over.
Can I answer that
Yeah.
one?
Yes.
Now, we've thought about that because we've here's Tim.
There are cannon banks.
There are cannon banks,
at
but
Salisbury.
what we think they now are is that because they were stationed at arms on the 20th, that they're defensive for Salisbury.
That's what I thought.
That's what we think there, because we've had that discussion of is there really?
Yeah.
Now there were 3-pounders, 6-pounder, and 12-pounder at Vinegar Hill. So each would have a longer range. I think off the top of my head, there's around 300 to 600. Yeah.
So their effective range isn't going to be that. There's no way they could fire from there.
Like solid shot, about 1,000 yards, I think.
A maximum for 1,000 yards.
And around 600 to start.
Yeah.
Hang on, Richard, I'll just come to this gentleman and come
I'm
back.
just wondering, the closer you get to the actual hill, the forest bushes gets a lot thicker. How will you work your survey?
Yeah, that is. I mean, I'm not going to lie, that's tough.
Yeah.
Forest bushes aren't great. I've just done a War of Independence like in Cork with forest bushes, and it's horrifying.
Yeah.
In fact, you're not going to really. What you want to be doing up the very top anyway, and of course that's a different ball game because you are as well within the National Monument. Is looking for. I'd look for kind of patches first there's a few patches that are clear and stuff like that. It's difficult with forest bushes, like, to be honest, to do anything.
And that's subsequent phases, so we have to go back and show merit in ongoing support.
Would that not be where the concentration of it would be?
The
base of the hill where the forest bushes are?
I think by the time anybody was up the top of the hill, the back was broken on any significant defence. Like, there's going to be, like, at the very summit. What you probably are going to have up there a bit more so is artillery fire. So because like they talk about targeting, they're talking about the flag flying and everything up there. So like I think the back is broken on the downward slopes, like, and everybody is kind of. If you were still up there, you were right, or you were hard stuff. If you were still up there waiting for the collection.
I was concerned with artillery brigades in 1798, right? Artillery brigades were made of. There would have been 4 12-pound field guns, 4 6-pounders, and 4 howitzers. And the howitzers are directly, if we're on top of the hill, looking straight down. The map gives the howitzers straight under the hill.
Right.
So where the 12-pounders or the 6-pounders were positioned. But judging what the 1798 centre have, they have a 2-pound cannonball. So there's more than just 12 field guns.
Well, and this is one of the things that all these archaeological, and I didn't kind of mention it too much at the start, but all the significant work on a lot of these sites like Bosworth and fields like this are finding that there is stuff and, if you like, top range material and that aren't recorded in the histories. That the histories aren't necessarily saying everything that's there. There's lots of gaps that archaeology fills in for us.
For a battle site that's so close to a town, and obviously there's been building on it, how intact or how happy are you with what you find or what you think you might find?
I'll look on the scale of things. It's good. Like, it's very good. I mean, most sites, if you take even the Kinsale siege sites, like the camps are okay, but an awful lot of the area has been built over up towards them. Like it is, there's disappoint. I suppose it's actually it's the things that you always feel the worst about are the recent ones, like the golf course and stuff like that. Yeah. But like in general, it's an incredibly well preserved site for its location. So I mean, it's to be commended, and that has to go down a lot to the efforts of local people too, because otherwise, you know, it's the fact that it's an iconic location has played into it, and the people care about it. Has a major impact on that.
Can I just say, Damian has talked about Dr. Tony Pollard in the Centre for Battlefield Studies in Glasgow. He's world renowned. He's on our steering committee. And when we contacted him first, we thought, oh God, you know, we're going to have such an uphill battle of getting Tony Pollard on board. And it was immediate, straight away, yes. And we said to him, why were you interested in it? And what he said was, your battlefield is intact.
The thing that we, myself and Glenn Ford and other battlefield archaeologists came here the first time I'd been on this site. The thing that immediately struck me about it was the fact that the ditches, the banks and ditches that you walk there are so clearly the defensive ditches used by the United Irishmen, and they're there. So what you effectively have, the way I look at it, is that when you walk up onto the hill, if you were on the western front, what you're seeing is the surviving trenches. You're seeing the surviving defensive lines of that battle are there for you. Like, you don't have to reconstruct them, they exist on the field, so it's very, very impressive from that perspective.
Sorry, I wanted to ask, you know there's a very big extension going ahead of the school. A lot of the locals, I'm one of the locals living in the area, put in objections. I went to Umbror Penola, and part of Umbror Penola giving permission was that there's to be someone like you on site when they're doing the extension. So what exactly will you be doing, the person be doing?
Right, well it all depends on conditions. I don't know anything about that specific case. There is an issue with general standard archaeological conditions. This is a whole separate discussion, but standard archaeological conditions tend to destroy battlefield archaeology, not preserve it. I've seen this problem on many battlefields. Standard archaeology like to go in advance is to do test trenching. And of course, if your archaeology is material in the topsoil, what you're doing is stripping away the archaeology. And that's happened at battlefields up and down, happens every week or two. So the condition would need to have specific metal detection with very strict parameters in it. I get the impression with the school, I'm not sure if it's the case, it looks like an awful lot of landscaping went on around it.
Yeah, I think it's already the damage.
Yeah, so that's probably done, it wrecked it.
Beautiful landscapes.
Yeah.
My dad found a cannonball the size of a tennis ball up on the top of Vinegar Hill. What kind of a cannon would that be?
Yeah, I'll defer back to this. It's going to be a small one. It'll be like your 2 pounders.
Yeah, 2 pounder probably. Yeah, the 2 to 4 pounder, probably a 2 pounder. Yeah. Unless
it was given into the museum, but we don't know where it went now. So
would you need to come to me on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Saturday and tell me that?
Do you expect to find mass graves?
Well, there's the potential. Like, I mean, there's always a thing to be considering here, right? So there's those could be mass graves. I always pause to say, do you want to be digging them? You know, you have to. There's a rationale behind where you want to go.
That was my next
from.
question.
Yeah. Like, well, there's lots of different issues in relation to that. Do you want to be digging them? It has to be said that digging human remains, it's not obviously primary considered, but it's inordinately expensive to do it as well. So there's an awful lot of considerations.
And is there a policy on that then?
Oh, there's lots of. Oh yeah. There's significant policies in relation to the excavation of human remains. To be very, and rightly so, like, particularly people who've died violent deaths as well. I think it's only appropriate. But so you have to think, like, most of the mass graves that have been identified in that place, like, so they've almost certainly found a mass grave at Culloden, but they haven't excavated. They're pretty sure that it's where it was, but they haven't.
And does it change the status of the site in any way if there is a mass grave there?
Not from a legislative position, it wouldn't. But, I suppose from you could argue that it does from a perception position. But, I mean, there's no question, we know there is mass graves on that hill. We know there is. You can ask a question as to whether those pits are mass graves or not, but we know they are up there, and we probably know there are more than them. So, it's the same on nearly every battlefield, but, like, we know that that's the case up there because the accounts are so good relating to it. So.
And I suppose, as Damian said, when we stood on that shoulder yesterday and you're holding impacted musket balls in your hand, and it becomes very obvious that there is a line at the bottom of that field, your brain goes to, it immediately transports you back to 98. It does. It happened to you, it happened to me, it happened to Ronan.
But people died in that field.
They did. So I suppose our job is to look at the bigger picture and not look at that small thing that can focus our attention, and that what the battlefield has yielded to us is significant. So for us it doesn't change its status. All of the range of stuff that we've found here makes that incredibly significant. And the question then is, do you really want to go anywhere near opening?
I'd like to know where they are though, that's the
Yeah,
plan.
so reserved.
Yeah, but that's possibly one. The accounts show that they're on every road. You know, you can pick up accounts and go, there were bodies scattered on every road. So mass is, more than two. So let's not become fixated with that. If they're there, so be it, but they're not, as Damian said, they're not the only ones.
Yeah, they do often follow a pattern of mass graves. Like, they're usually by roads, usually existing roads. They're usually at easy access points, because most of the work on battlefields has shown that people don't, if there's anything pre-existing they can use it. So for example, it was quarrying on the hill, that type of stuff. The work that's been done and the excavations that have been done and the analysis suggests that people are actually normally very, I suppose, lazy is the word, in relation to how they dispose of dead from battlefields. So if they can't put them all together, they put them on a wagon by a road, they bury them by a road. So they're the type of locations that you would expect to find them there.
The other thing is, we say there's a huge amount of circumstantial evidence that would say that these are the mass graves because of the location, because of the size, the scale there, because of the contemporary accounts which describe, as Damian read out, exactly what happened of tipping them down a declivity into this area which is low. That's exactly where these are situated. But also, it doesn't appear on the 1835 or the Ordnance Survey map. It is, whatever it was, it predates that, and it was covered over and gone at that stage. So it's not something later. So it's the weight of evidence would strongly suggest these are mass graves.
But they're not the only ones.
They're not the only ones.
Sorry, yes.
At the Bullring Crossroads, there's a mass grave there, in that place there. There could be over 400 died on Thomas Hill in 1978. Yeah, they went through the history of it. And there's humps and hollows and everything there. You can see it there. And I think, just try it. Might be something there. I won't be anyway, because there was men and children and all very
there. Yeah, a bit of information for you. For your
Tower Nearing, that's only 10 mile up the road. the reports at the time were that the dead were lined up along by the ditches beside the road, as you said, and the ditch was turned over, and it's actually supposedly where the road is widened. So, and if you were going to do some field work there, we know for a fact that Walco unleashed his grape shop across that field, so there should be
Are there any official British military records of people, of soldiers from Vinegar Hill for the Battle of Vinegar?
Oh yeah, Lake files his return to Cornwallis in Dublin the 22nd of June and gives specific details of who from the Crown Forces was killed, wounded or missing. Missing isn't the word.
That's right, yeah.
But very specific for each regiment. So they're there, and I think I got 63.
86 for the whole lot for the 21st of June.
Yeah. So they're there and they're available in accounts. Maxwell has them, Musgrave has them.
Right.
Who else has them, Rory? Maxwell and Musgrave.
Taylor, I think, has
Taylor, yeah. So they're there. You can go onto Google Books and we can find the list. They'll be in the article on the Crown Forces when we publish later next year. The list will be there. Go buy the book. Don't go onto Google Books.
So all these findings be published and then available to the public, would it?
Yeah, well, yeah, and there, I think there is plans for a book, but yeah, we'll be making them all.
They're the property of the state, so by right they'll go back to the National Museum.
I'd say we'd probably put the reports up anyway. Yeah. So all the reports will go online and everything when they're finished. So.
But the finds themselves are the property of the state, so they'll be conserved and sent back to the National Museum, and then whatever negotiation might go back and forwards between Dublin and Enniscorthy to display some of them. That's possible, yeah.
Wouldn't the deadly very immediately to prevent disease? Wouldn't it be first priority for health?
Take that one
Bury
there.
them?
Yeah. More was 2 weeks up there and he was getting to come on last Friday today, so we were here a long time.
We were left a long time.
Yeah, and it's not unusual. There's a lot. So the Aughrim battlefield I was talking about as well. They talked about that you could go there years after and find the bleached bones. Like there's stories of them shattered. They're shattered up and down the country like a great flock of sheep, is what they say about Aughrim. They say sheep because their bodies are all stripped. So you would rob everything you see off the body because, you know, everybody was poor.
People are said to have died already one time in that rebellion and in the French Revolution. 30,000 people died in the Wexford Rebellion.
It was pretty bloody.
That's what I mean, there was a lot of dead bodies.
Yeah, a lot of dead bodies. Yeah. Well, if you think, like, I mean, I'm not a specialist on the 79th rebellion, the lads are, but like after the economy of everywhere is destroyed, there's been fighting through the town, the entire county is being razed. Like, I mean, it's savagery. So society has effectively broken down in days and weeks following an event like that.
The emotional shock and
Yeah.
trauma.
Yeah. It must have been an incredible time to be around here.
We won't see any other hands. So if that's it, again, thank you all very, very much for coming tonight. We'll all be here for a little while anyway.